Hey guys, I miss you, and I thought I would just get on here and talk a little bit about Chapter 10 and the insanity plea issue and all that sort of stuff. You've read about it. Many of you have already started the test. If you have questions about the progression or some of the actual laws that have been in place, please email me, let me know. I'd be happy to talk about that specifically. But I wanted to address something that I would have talked about in class, and that is the idea, going back to when we've talked a little bit about this before, the idea that insanity is not a psychological concept, it's a legal concept. And it's really hard for psychologists to operate in the realm of black and white, insane or not insane, all those sorts of things. I think if you think about this from a more philosophical standpoint, that it is in order to commit a heinous crime, then there must be, to some extent, probably some type of mental illness. Whether, what that looks like and what you want to call it, we could argue about. Or maybe it's a defective character. I don't know, but I think psychologists have a little bit of a difficult time with that. If you look at the standard before the John Hinckley assassination attempt that you guys discussed so eloquently in your papers, and you look at the ALI standard, the American Law the American Law Institute standard that was in place before that, that standard, this is a quote from that standard, and a person is not responsible for criminal conduct if at the time of such conduct, as a result of mental disease or a defect, he lacks substantial capacity either to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law. After the Hinckley case, that was abandoned and revised in the IDRA, the Insanity Defense Reform Act. That one of the big things, and many of you mentioned this, some of you did not, was that it shifted the burden of proof in terms of sanity or insanity from the prosecution having to prove. Previously, the prosecution had to prove that the defendant was sane at the time of the crime. It shifted that to the defense has to prove to the court that the defendant was not sane at the time of the crime. So there's a few things that are challenging about trying to determine sanity. We've talked about one, it's not a psychological term. The other one is that it's a retrospective call. So it's hard to speak to someone's mental state at the time of the crime. And some of you that are in criminal justice have studied this concept in other places, the irresistible impulse component. If you walk in on your significant other in bed with somebody else and you kill that person immediately in that instant, it's classified as one type of crime. If you leave the room and go to the kitchen and get a knife and come back and kill them, it's a different kind of a crime. So the impulsivity of that, but also I think, when you start to think about how different kinds of mental illness can affect someone's capacity to constrain their behavior, it starts to get a little bit complicated. And the third difficulty, so it's not a psychological term, we have to be retrospective. Number 3 is that even people who clearly suffer from some mental illness may not qualify as insane, quote unquote, using the legal defense, the legal definition. And of course, there are those who would like to abolish the option of insanity pleas and findings completely. And certainly that there was a big movement for that after the Hinckley trial because many people thought that wasn't fair. What a lot of you did not mention in your papers was the alternative verdict that was adopted by some states of guilty but mentally ill, which, and I mentioned this in my comments to many of you, the guilty but mentally ill optional verdict would hold the individual responsible for their crime and would enact the criminal penalties, but it also requires the justice system to provide treatment while that individual is incarcerated. It acknowledges a significant mental illness and requires treatment, which, seems to appease most of us, I think. We think, well, okay, the crime was committed. the problem therein lies, the issue is that often prison systems, the resources, financial and otherwise, just aren't there. There may not be enough mental health professionals to go around. So in reality, what happens is that they can't provide the services that individuals need. And as you'll see, when we look at a couple documentaries that are coming up, and I'll be posting those very soon. When we look at those, what we see is that prisons just they do not lend themselves to becoming mentally healthier. If anything, the mental health tends to deteriorate for everybody, or for many people while they're incarcerated, especially if somebody acts out, which oftentimes somebody with a significant mental illness is going to do, and then they're put in solitary. And so, and you guys have probably seen ample examples of how people deteriorate under those circumstances. So it's certainly a complicated issue, and one that I just wanted to touch on. I wish that you guys were here and we could talk about this. I am going to be looking for it. I'll post an announcement, but I will set up an online chat where we won't see each other face to face, but we can set up a time and be live online so that there can be some conversation among everybody. And so we'll do that coming up here pretty soon. So if anybody has questions about anything, let me know. I hope that you are all well and finding things to do to amuse yourselves. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye.